Okay, shall we start?
Ready when you are? Yes.
All
That's
right.
okay.
Habari na asante. My name is Justin Morgan Parmett, and for now, I am the co-director of debate at the Lawrence Debate Union at the University of Vermont. It's my pleasure to be here today. As the group gets bigger, we'll see. I'll remind people, but I would love it if you all jump in with questions and even more particular, if I have questions for you all, I would love it if you would jump in with some answers that you think you might have. But let's try and make it a bit interactive if possible. I am going to talk today about the similarities and differences between BP and social justice debates. And I'm going to focus more on the differences, to be honest, but still want to acknowledge some key similarities, and then some of those will resonate throughout the rest of this discussion. I hope by the end, if not throughout, that you all have some questions for me. So I want to highlight first, before we get started, three similarities between British parliamentary debate and social justice debate. And they may seem rudimentary, but they are important to keep in mind. All right. One, they are both debate. All right. So regardless of format, what happens, especially as you move into a more evidence-based format, uh, people start to rely sometimes too much on that evidence and forget that y'all are really smart critical thinkers. So you want to stay engaged in the debate, engaged in the arguments, always feeling, as confident as you can that you will have something to say. But engage your speaking and critical thinking skills. Pretty obvious and simple one, right? Second one, they are both audience-centered activities. Uh, and what that means is that at the end of the day, the win or loss in terms of the competitive format is decided by a judge or a series of judges. We'll talk a bit more later about the differences there, as you have one judge in social justice debates, usually in the in rounds, with then panels in the elimination rounds, as opposed to panels the entire time. But what that really means is your job is to persuade the judge. And we'll get back to this a little bit later, but sometimes you have good calls, sometimes you have bad calls. That is true of any style of debate, right? And so watch for leaving and being like, oh, I know so much more than that judge. That was horrible. What happens if you got a good or bad call against you is it means you didn't persuade that judge. And so you maybe need to do some work in order to persuade that judge. Third, and maybe most important, is that they are both incredibly fun activities. I've been in debate now. I just talked to my team about this for 3 decades, and I wouldn't keep doing it. Don't do it for the pay. Believe me, I know Ken could probably speak to that also. We do it because it's fun, because it's exciting, and if you already do BP debate, you know that thrill of why you do it. And so bring all of that energy and excitement to social justice debates. Those are pretty simple three similarities. Now, I don't want to say everything else that you know about BP debate is different. That is absolutely not true. There's a lot of other similarities, like two sides to the debate and things like that. But I think that if you saw Ken's presentation last time, you probably have a really good sense of some of the other thematic differences between the two formats and similarities. What I want to do now is highlight more of the differences and relate some similarities along the way. But I want to focus on three different things, and I'll do this in chronological order. I'll talk about preparation, which means like everything before the tournament. Then I'm going to focus on like when you get there in round one, and then what happens for the rest of the tournament. Within all of this, I'm going to highlight some of the differences between two-person teams and three-person teams. Let me ask you all one more question. You don't have to answer. This one is, please ask questions if anything is confusing. All right. So preparation. Uh, When does prep start for the social justice debate tournament that's happening in Arusha? Can anyone tell me? Guess? Okay. That's fair that you don't want to. Yeah, Farissa, now. Yes, now is good, although the way I would rephrase that is it already started as soon as the topic was announced. Soon as the topic was announced, everyone that's involved that knows about the tournament has equal time to start preparing. All right. But certainly now is true. If you and your teammates have not started preparing for the social justice debates, now is a good time to do that. If you don't know who you're debating with, now is still a good time to start preparing for the social justice debates. So, in terms of preparation, I want to talk quickly about five things. All right. First is research. And I know Ken talked a lot about doing research, so I'm not going to reiterate all that. What I would say is that you have a topic and you want to start with general to specific research. Some of the best research, actually, some of that process has been done for you by the people that worked on the topic, and there's a great bibliography. I would read the topic statement, and start doing the research from the bibliography. Learn about the topic, learn about the sides, all right? Get yourself well accustomed to the topic before you start committing yourself to arguments and cases, all right? I'll get there a little bit. Well, that's the next thing you do. Once you have teams together, you start thinking about case writing. Now, before I talk about that, let's talk a little bit about the difference between two-person and three-person teams. Because here, in terms of case writing, it's similar, but each person also then becomes responsible for different things. Now, in BP, when we have some research, when we have some time, people try and write cases or briefs, right, about a particular topic, and those are relatively short to give general information in a way that will be used 15 minutes before the round. Social justice debates are very different. Research, as Farissa indicated, starts now, right? So you're putting things together, you're working together as a team to write cases that will be used throughout the debate. So whether you're a two-person team or a three-person team, it's crucial that you end up all feeling comfortable about the case. And what I'll call the case will be the 1AC or the 1NC. Was anyone here last week to remember what that was? Give me a hand up if you know what that means. Well, never mind. That'll take too long. The first affirmative constructive and the first negative constructive, right? These are going to be your cases. All right. And what that really means is that the vast majority of information that you will be debating about throughout the debate rounds will come from your 1AC and 1NC. Ken talked about the structure. You don't make brand new arguments in the rebuttals at the end. This is different than BP, where each person works together as a team, but also has to have some kind of contribution, often with the exception of the whips, right? But you do not want to be having a situation where every speech, a different speaker brings up a new and unique argument. You want to all feel comfortable. You want to agree on the arguments that are going to be presented in the case by the first affirmative and first negative. And then from there, you work on extensions, front lines, summaries. All right. And so some of the differences are going to be when we decide speaker positions, and I'll get there. But I just want to make it clear that whether you are a two or a three-person team, you all work together to create that very first case that you feel comfortable with. Much more information comes into the debate after, but that is a crucial thing. And again, you know the topic, and so you know what whatever the research is and whatever it is you want to say. Similar to writing a PM or a LO speech, the case should have a nice little introduction of why what the importance is, presenting a proposal, and then giving clear benefits to that proposal is very similar structure. All right. So you want to work on those two cases together. All members of the team feel good about that. And then you move into the next thing. All right. And this is where you start taking that case and writing what I'll call extensions and front lines. We can call these a lot of different things, but basically what you want to think about is what are some of the key arguments that I have in my case that I might need to expand upon, right? To spend more time on, and you'll want to have new evidence and new arguments and ideas prepared for the second speech about what you had in your case that you'll need to extend upon further. Now you have so much prep time about your case, you also want to be thinking, what's the other side going to say? Right? And you want to brainstorm as many arguments that the other side could say. And then what do you want to do with them? Can anyone either put in the chat or unmute for a second? Once you have a sense of what the arguments are that the other side is going to say, what do you want to do next? You want to answer them, right? You want to find answers through more research to the arguments that might be against you. Now, sometimes there's an argument you find that's just so devastating that you might want to change course. And as you're writing your case, this is a little bit of a back and forth process until you feel really comfortable about your case. And then you continue with those extensions and those front lines until you feel pretty confident that you've got a sense of, all right, no matter what they say, I'll have something to say. Now, usually in social justice debates, first speeches are pre-written. So when I say write your case, you can pre-write a case almost word for word so that it is a 6 minute long speech and you and your partners all know back and forth everything that's in that case. Do not pre-write completely second speeches or third speeches because they must account for what's happening within the debate, the responses the other team is saying. If you are prepared, that is crucial. But if you are too pre-prepared, then you sound mechanical and you don't sound like you're engaging the debate. And remember, what did I say? One of the similarities are they're both debate. You need to use your critical thinking skills, right? So don't let a pre-written case in the second or third speech, come in for better critical thinking skills to know what the right argument is. Okay, now some of those extension and front lines probably happen actually after this next thing, which is decide what your speaker positions are going to be. And here is a crucial thing to talk about the difference between second and third, 2 and 3 person teams. Can you use the raise your hand function if you think you're going to be in a 2 person team in the social justice debates in Arusha? How about a 3 person team? Come on. How about I don't know yet?
Please pardon.
Anyone, raise your hand if you are not competing. Yeah. Okay. Cool, cool. Anyway, let's move back into deciding speaker positions. 3 person. Nice. Thanks. Okay, so 2 person teams, 1 person will speak twice, obviously, because there are still 3 speeches. What is crucial is that you decide who is the person that will speak twice on the affirmative and who is the person that will speak twice on the negative. Then generally you designate a leader for each side. If I'm speaking twice, then I'm probably going to be the leader for the side that I'm speaking twice on. That usually makes the most sense. Now, different squads have different preferences for this, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to just tell you what my preference is. My preference and the way that we always coach our teams is that if you're on a two-person team, the person that gives the first speech is usually the person that also gives the last speech. Now, sometimes that second speech is crucial, and the person that decides to be the second speaker decides to be the leader of that side. This kind of stuff is up to you. Some teams have one person give the first speech and then another person give the second and the third. And that's also another way to do it. It kind of puts that first person a little bit more out of the debate, though. Um, so that's something to think about. Three-person teams, obviously, everybody's going to give a different speech. And I would try really hard to have different assignments for affirmative and negative. Maybe you have few exceptions, but I wouldn't have the same person give. The key thing is don't have the same person give the affirmative, the first affirmative and the first negative. Okay? That's kind of a lot. Does that make sense? It's okay if you're confused. I can go back to some of that. Okay. Now, again, because there's no front half and back half, a big difference in BP is not about distinguishing yourself continually throughout the debate, as I said before, but it's about really having all of your arguments flow from the first speech to get well developed, to answer the other side, and then to summarize at the very end why you've won the debate. So it all has to come from it's a flow where the speech just really develops and then gets summarized as opposed to, you know, a debate and then a different debate. And that's a really important thing to think about in terms of your team dynamics, especially when you're three of you. You're just as much working together as an entire team. All right. We're going to get to the way in which two and three-person teams work a little bit differently with cross-examination in just a little bit as well. All right. Once you've done all of those things, the last step that you should be doing before you come into the debate tournament is having practice debates. If your squad is big enough, have practice debates against other teams on your squad. If your squad is not big enough, reach out to other institutions to have practice debates. If you don't know any institutions to reach out to, I'm going to put the UVM connection, and you'll reach out to Isabel Burney. Uh, Isabel,
Actually, Justin, we're planning with Isabel to do like some showcase debate. So
yeah.
yeah, we're already
That'll be
planning.
great for her to do the showcase. But she's also, what I was going to say is the UVM squad would be happy to have practice debates against other squads in the upcoming to the tournament. So if any of you don't have folks to debate against, we can try to put together debates against the UVM squad. Then you would coordinate with Isabel for that. Now you're ready. Cases, you practice them, you're all excited, you're going to have a really good time because, that's what debate tournaments are about. So you show up. Okay. Anyone ever show up to a debate tournament and wait for a while? I bet you have. And that might be what happens. Like any debate tournament, one of the similarities is that you'll need some patience to make it through the day. Usually, a social justice debate tournament could go a little bit faster than a BP tournament for a couple of reasons, but mostly because it's the same topic each time, and it's only one team against another team. So while you're waiting, stay relaxed, make sure your partners are all on the same page and ready. One thing that I would strongly suggest is that you get to the tournament and you read something out loud. You read a 6-minute speech. Um, Generally, it's a good idea for everyone on the team to read the affirmative and the negative 1A, and 1N out loud somewhere. Go find a corner, read to yourself out loud. It gets your brain going, it gets your mouth going, it gets you really energized and stimulated and ready. At a minimum, do that for like 3 minutes and read something at the beginning. Okay? Then, just like BP, go hang out with your friends. All right? Enjoy the time and wait for the draw to be released. Now, the draw, right? Draw is a major importance. The first draw comes out, and here is a really big difference between BP and SJD because one, when the draw is announced, you won't get a motion release. Okay, you won't get a motion release because we know the motion. It's already been announced. It's going to be the same motion for every round at the tournament. All right. And so what happens is the draw will tell you what room you're in, who you're debating against, who your judge is. Same basic things. Difference. In BP debate, you have you and your partner, no internet, nothing. In social justice debates, before that round starts, you can chat with coaches, ask other debaters questions about the team you're about to hit or about the judge that's judging you. And then you can go into the round with a little bit of knowledge of what might be happening. And you have your computer, right? And your drive. All of you should have pretty organized drives for your different cases, and you and your teammates are able to access all of that at the same time. All right. So you have all of that ready, and when the draw is released, you go to your room and start your round. No prep time, basically. They might give you a couple of minutes to get your materials together, but really, you start ASAP. And that's because you don't need prep time because you already have had it. All right. Now, during the round. During the round, these are some of the biggest differences. The first is what I was just alluding to, is your ability to use your research and cases, right? You go in with all your evidence and all your pre-written material. This is great for those that are really prepared and can also be really overwhelming for folks that haven't looked through all of that or are like using other people's research or thing, who knows. So, watch out for being overwhelmed by it. I don't want to say less is more. I want you to be thorough with your research, but I don't want you to get so bogged down in having written up so many things that you can't even find what it is you're looking for. But learn how to play around if you haven't already with taking all of the different things that you have and pasting them and creating a case, and watching or a speech, I'm sorry, especially for the second and third speeches. Also, in this regard, allow yourself an open Google Doc between the two of you, all right? Or three of you. All of your partners can just have a shared document. You're all looking at your computers and you're able to do some things like that. You're able to pass notes between each other if you need to, all right? And this brings me into a second thing during the round, which is the way in which you flow or take notes, all right? Not only should you all just have a open doc where maybe you have your like cross-examination questions or notes to each other that are important, but each of you has your own flow of the speech. And rather than flow speeches in boxes the way that we do in BP or even downlines. In BP, it's very much about flowing speeches compared to each other. In social justice debates, I would suggest rather than speeches, flowing arguments next to each other, right? Because again, like the case is going to have a couple of key basic places where there will be argumentation and debate taking place, and those are where you want to do them separately throughout the round. So if you can, try and flow arguments rather than speeches. I flow in lines down the screen, and so you flow across each speech in a line based on different arguments. So argument one might be flowed on the top of this paper, argument two at the bottom of the paper, argument three on the back of the paper. Who knows? All right. So think about it in that way when you think about flowing, and you're able to look at your partner's flows. You can use your partner's words and flows as they're taking notes into your speech. Also, always flow both yours and your partner's speeches throughout the the process of the date, at least until you are done, but really throughout so that you can be helping each other out. All right. You want to know exactly what it was that your partner said as you're comparing in your flow to what it is that the other team said against you. Okay. Does that make sense? Any questions thus far? I've said so much. All right. We are moving right along. Jump in with, yeah, go ahead. Yep, go for it. Yusuf?
Hello, I hope you can
Hey.
hear me.
Yeah, great.
Well, I was a bit late a few minutes ago. Sorry for that. But my question is actually basing on the comparison you are making between this social justice debate format and BP. For me, this is my very first time attending to this social justice debate, and looking at the details of the tournament. It's like the format to be used is social justice debate format. Now, from the way you were explaining the time, the speaker's role, the order of speech, as well as the number of speech in the debate or per team, I see similarities between this format and World School Debate format. But most of your comparison was between BP and this format. Now, I'd like to have I'd like to have clarification as to what is the difference between World School Debate format and this format you're going to use in this tournament in terms of speakers' roles, timing, order of speech, and you said something about cross-examination.
This is the next thing
When
I'm
does
getting
it?
to. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, good question. SJD is much more similar to World Schools Debate than it is to BP, and I appreciate that question. I guess I'm under the assumption that many of you have been engaged in some university level BP debate and are making that comparison. But it does strike me, you're right, that all of you probably have at least some introduction to world schools, and there's a couple of key differences. It's one less speech on each side. So it concludes with the third speech being like more of a whip speech on some level. And it also does not have points of information. Instead, it has cross-examination. And cross-examination is actually the next thing that I was going to talk to about in terms of during the round and the differences between, I guess, in this sense, world schools and BP, because it's one of the most significant differences other than the way in which, well, and I don't even know now, world schools, does it let you use your computers and evidence and access to the internet during the round?
Access of
Anyone know?
internet? No, but you can
No.
use your computer just for perusing, yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so other than the use of the internet, the use of all of your research, things like that, um, and the cross-examination, these are some of the biggest differences. So let's move into cross-examination right now, if that makes sense. Um, Cross-examination happens 4 times in the debate, and it is after each constructive speech. So there are 2 affirmative constructive speeches and 2 negative constructive speeches, and they are 6 minutes each, followed by 4 minutes of cross-examination. So let's start with the basic. Who asks the questions? Who answers the questions? All right. Generally, the person let's start with answers because that's easy. The person that answers the question is generally the person that was just up there speaking. I say generally because there are times where it's appropriate for the person speaking to take a specific question that they know their partner did all of that research on and say, you know, I'll give you a general answer, but let me like defer to my partner to be more specific on that. And sometimes your partner will give that answer. This should be rare, okay? Rare, rare, rare. And there's a key reason for this. Especially in two-person teams, when one speaker is being cross-examined, the other speaker should be using that 4 minutes of time as preparation time for when they are going to next be giving their speech. Okay, so they don't want to have to be like listening so intently to the cross-examination. You don't want to be interrupting your speaker up there to try and answer more on a question ever. All right. If you are the members of the team, whether you're a 2 or a 3-person team, and there is a question answered, you really want to just stay focused on thinking about that as preparation time as much as possible. Only if you're asked to answer something, but try not to ask them that much. All right. Who answers the question? Generally, okay, and this may be confusing for a second, but I'll try and like really clarify it pragmatically. But generally, the person that should answer, the person that should ask the questions is the person that is furthest away from speaking. Usually, furthest away from speaking means you already spoke. Okay. But obviously, at the very beginning, it might not mean that. So if you are a 2-person team, oh, sorry, I'm looking at the thing. Okay, if you are a 2-person team and the first affirmative just gave their speech and you're the negative, then the very next speaker is the first negative speaker. That person should take the 4 minutes to make sure they feel comfortable with their speech. If there's maybe any last minute adaptions based on what was just said, they focus on that. The second negative asks questions of the first speaker. That is like a demonstration of the most prepared team. Okay? If there's not enough questions for that person, you should not stop asking questions. All right. You might need to have some help. You all have a Google Drive where you can share asking what the question should be. But the reason you should not stop early is because that cross-examination time is valuable preparation time for whoever will be the next speaker. Okay. Now the 1NC speaks. And the very next speaker after that is going to be the second affirmative speaker. The first affirmative just went. They're furthest from speaking. They ask the questions. Okay? Folks can either write this down or this is going to be recorded and you can repeat that. Now, after that, the second affirmative speaker speaks. And the second negative speaker is going to speak. And the first negative already spoke. So the first negative is the person that can ask those questions. And then the second negative speaks. And the third is I'm sorry, I now just got myself lost. All right. But keep this, the furthest away from giving their speech should ask the questions. That's important. And the third speaker should probably ask questions. So actually, right, when the first speaker speaks, maybe the third speaker asks if you're a 3-person team. When the second speaker asks, the first person goes, right? But the third speaker who's only giving that summarization speech, whip speech, should definitely be asking questions and they shouldn't be right before they have to speak. So that's a difference between 2 and 3-person teams. Sorry for some of that confusion. Let's think about whether or not that, let's start with that, whether that makes sense, and then I'm going to talk a bit on the prep time. Does anyone have questions about that? Is that clear about who asks questions when and who answers when? Didn't feel clear. Okay, cross-examination. Why do you ask questions? It is part of the debate, and Ken already did this last week, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But you ask questions to point out flaws in the other side's case. You ask questions to point out sometimes the way your evidence or arguments have already answered the other side's case and that they have not responded to those things. So you demonstrate the gaps in where they failed their argumentation. And sometimes, if needed, you ask questions to get clarification or definition. Don't ask questions to have them elaborate. Can you please elaborate on why you think this first argument is true? Right? I mean, if I'm the other side and you ask me that question, I'll be like, yes, thank you. Let me do a whole bunch of convincing the judges that my arguments are amazing, smart, better than anything you have, right? So if you don't understand something, don't ask them to elaborate. Say, what was it on that point? Can you clarify what you said about X? Quick clarifications. That's what you want. All right. So those are the key things about cross-examination. But most importantly, before you go into the round, when you determine speaker positions, start asking yourself who's going to cross-examine who and be prepared for doing that. That being said, the questions you ask are all things you work on together as a team. Cool. I'm almost done. Last thing about that whole section of, you've just had the beginning of the tournament and the first round. Once the rounds is over, it's usually a little bit different. Often, but not always, but often you will just stay in the room. Sometimes the judge will ask you to leave, but often the judge will just have you stay in the room. They'll sit quietly, look over their notes. Sometimes they'll write out what they want to say, sometimes they won't. The judge will fill out the ballot and then they will make their decision. So what that really means is the first thing you do is you go shake hands like always, and then you're going to sit there waiting. What I would do as you sit there waiting is clean up your desktop. Each round should kind of start over with a lot of open tabs for notes for each other and all these different you know, whatever different documents, what your case ended up being like, what the other speeches ended up being like, save them all. I would have a folder for round one and say, put everything in there and then have a relatively clean desktop. And then the only other document that you should leave open for round one is notes from the judge. All right. And then you wait and the judge gives their decision and you want to write down the judge's name and ideally the institution where they're from and then take notes on and also write down the other team you debated and the side you were on. So you remember all of that, okay? And then you take notes and it's so important that you don't just dismiss the judge because even if you lost, y'all are going to be fabulous and win all the other rounds and end up in the elimination rounds. And you may have that same judge in the elimination rounds, and you'll want to be able to persuade them because, as I said, BP, World Schools, doesn't matter, SJD, they're audience-centered activities where your job is to persuade the judge. So you have a unique opportunity in social justice debates to have that judge again at a tournament on the exact same arguments that they told you why they didn't think they were good. And hopefully, if you engage them, they told you what you can do better to convince them. And then guess what? Do that, right? Also, during the tournament, you and your partners may have had a judge and your other teammates have that judge and you can talk to each other. So this is the repetitive nature of the same round, the same topic every time, and the development and building of your case every time is a big difference between those. Last thing that I want to take about 5 minutes on, and then hopefully you all have questions, is what you do for the rest of the tournament. After round one, and therefore, in terms of the draw and how the rounds go, each one is going to be the same. All right. but there's a couple of differences because of the nature of having the same topic each time. So first thing, when you're done, hopefully you always have someone in any round to talk to get feedback on, whether it be the judge or a coach or a teammate or another team that is on your same institution or another institution y'all are close with. You want to talk to them and you want to collectively keep track of what's happening in the debates with you and your other team. So that way you can, if you happen to end up in a situation where you're debating a team that your other folks that you know have debated, or you have a judge that other folks that you know have judged, you should try and get that information, keep it, so that if and when it becomes useful, you can use that, especially knowing what other teams are running. All right. Because it generally should stay the same thing. And then take a little bit of time when you have that in between rounds to think about, right? How did you win or lose? What could you have done better? What research and info do you already have that you could have used that would have helped in that debate? And or what research do you now need to do, or arguments do you need to come up with in order to be better in the next debate? So that transitions really into something you're doing throughout the debate is research and updates. All right, you want to think about that in between rounds. And there's a lot of ways to go about this. And again, different strategies. I'm going to just give you my advice. My advice is when you come across arguments that you feel like, oh my gosh, I have to answer these arguments, try not to back away from your original arguments. Try to engage those arguments head on and try and beat them. All right. So you generally want to have the same 1AC or 1NC throughout the tournament. You might make updates because you found better evidence to answer arguments, or you found better evidence that really, made the points you were making. But I don't want you to be like, oh no, in the first round, our strategy didn't work well, so we're going to change our strategy in the second time we're affirmative. That is not a good idea, because if you did all this work and prep, had a practice debate, and the strategy didn't go well, chances are starting over with a new strategy mid-tournament, it's not going to go well the first time either. And you only have a limited number of affirmatives. I believe it's 2 affirmatives and 2 negatives in the debate. So your best bet is to take that time to find answers to build your arguments. All right. Same thing with speaker positions. Whether you were a 2 or a 3-person team, if you've had practice, if you've done the research, go in with a plan of what your speaker positions are going to be and then keep them, right? It's not like BP debate where I know a lot of people, and I encourage people to say, well, it depends on whether you're front half or back half, and it depends on what the topic is and who knows more, right? Those can all determine sometimes speaker positions, but definitely try and stick with your speaker positions throughout the debate. All right. And then really the last thing I want to say, and hopefully there's some time where y'all have some questions for me again, is keep meeting people just like any other debate tournament. Talk to the folks you debate with, talk to your judges. Debate should be a fun activity. That's why we keep doing it. Be nice to each other, have a great time. Even if you are doing it for the first time, you're not debating for the first time. So just go in, don't think of it as so dramatically different, and I think you'll find yourself doing well. That's all I got, and I hope you all have some questions for me. If not, it was really nice to talk to you. Go ahead, Yusuf.
Okay. Well, sorry, my questions will much be based on the world school, because that's a system I've been using for a lot more of the tournaments I've participated in. So about this cross-examination, because that's a very new idea to me. And you said instead of POI, now we have this cross-examination. But sorry for not asking then, but it was not so clear as to who asked the question. And but also in what order is this cross-examination done? Also, speaking about the number of speeches, you said in the old school there are more speeches than in this SDJ, and you say there is one less speech in this. So what is missing? Because we have the speeches for each and every speaker in the world school, then we have a reply speech. And one more thing is you said there can be 2 or 3 members in a team under this format. So what the number of speech specifically, a clarification on that, please. So it's a number of speech, and how is cross-examination done, and who asked the question in cross-examination?
Okay. I'll try and get through that really quick. One thing I will say is last week Ken Newby did one. Hopefully it was that was recorded, and he goes into some of those in a lot more detail. There are 6 speeches in the debate rather than 8. There is not a reply speech, I guess I would say, and I don't coach World Schools debate, so I honestly, am not 100% confident that I know all the dynamics, but there are 2 constructive speeches and a kind of whip summary speech. We call it a rebuttal speech, and they're all 6 minutes long. And whether you're a 2-person team or a 3-person team, it's the same format. When you're a 2-person team, someone speaks twice on each side. And I went through some of that earlier. I know this is recorded, so maybe going back to some of that will help you. But really, 3 6-minute speeches on each side. There's 4 minutes of cross-examination after the constructive speeches. So the first affirmative speaks for 6 minutes. Then there's 4 minutes of cross-examination. Then the first negative speaker speaks for 6 minutes and then 4 minutes of cross-examination. The second affirmative speaker, 6 minutes with 4 minutes of cross-examination. And then the second negative speaker speaks for 6 minutes with 4 minutes of cross-examination. Then the affirmative team has 2 minutes to prepare for their rebuttal speech, and it's a 6-minute speech. And then the negative has 2 minutes of preparation to prepare, and someone delivers a 6-minute rebuttal speech. If you are a 3-person team, you will choose ahead of time who does the first, second, and third speech. If you're a 2-person team, you'll decide ahead of time when we're affirmative, one of us will speak twice, and when we're negative, the other one of us will speak twice. In terms of who does the cross-examination, it's only what I say is that there are some suggestions. One thing is if you are a 3-person team, your third speaker has to ask questions during a cross-examination because they will never be answering questions. Okay? If you're a 2-person team, then you often have more flexibility. The most important rule of thumb is if you are the next person speaking, then you should be using that time to prepare rather than ask questions, whether you're a 2 or a 3-person team. The person that is speaking next should not ask questions. They should take that 4 minutes and think of it as extra preparation time before their speech. Did I get at all your questions there? I feel like I might have missed one. Yeah,
Definitely, you've got all of them, and I've well understood. Thank you.
excellent. Yeah, no problem. Good questions, for sure. It's important stuff to really understand. Does anyone else have any questions about these differences? Any nerves they have about jumping into a SJD debate? I think y'all will love the repetition. You learn so much more throughout by debating multiple times. That's why I think having some practice debates are really good, but I could promise you that, you will improve along the way each time and see real improvement in the way you can get feedback, put that into your case, and be better. Yeah, I hope you all enjoy it. Look at that, and it is just on time. All right. If no other questions, I think we can end there, huh?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that guys are ready. Everyone is ready now, at least in terms of team dynamics and everything. As usual, please keep a lookout on the link for the recording that will be coming up soon, right? We have more workshops coming up on research as well. So keep your calendars open for this. Thank you so much for staying this long for the next workshops. I suggest you come in with your teammates just so that it's easy as well, instead of just one of you, coming to the workshops, at least when you're a beginner. Other than that, thank you so much, Justin, for taking up this session. It was a pleasure, and I believe everyone is now comfortable, and definitely when they see you, I'm sure they'll give you the many flowers that you deserve. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think with that we can end it here. So unless someone wants to ask like a different question without someone's presence, you're free to go. Yes, thank you, Jens. Nelly, Yusuf, Adrian. Yeah, you can slowly log out at your own pace, but we'll be here for those who want to ask other questions for like minutes.